Well, our thanks as always to Home Street Bank for their support of this podcast. If you're looking for a bank that has it all, great people, great service, great rates, this is the place for you. This is my lender of choice. It should be yours as well. Go to homestreetbank.com. It's your one-stop shop for all your banking needs, both business and personal. That's homestreetbank.com. Hey, are you a good influencer? Well, you might think so. But you might challenge that thinking once you hear what's coming up next on The Buyer's Mind.
Welcome to The Buyer's Mind, where we take a closer look deep inside your customer's decision-making mechanism to reverse engineer the perfect sales presentation. Now, please welcome your host, Jeff Shore.
Well, welcome everyone once again to The Buyer's Mind, where we investigate just what's going on in the brains of customers who are thinking about making a purchase decision. And if we can understand what's going on in their brain, then we can alter, change, re-engineer our sales presentation to make it easy for our buyers to buy. My name is Jeff Shore, your host on The Buyer's Mind. As always, joined by our show producer, Paul Murphy. And Murph, we got a great guest today. You excited?
I am excited. Do you want to tell him, or do you want me to tell him?
No, you make the announcement. Go ahead, Murph.
Bob Burg.
Yes.
Bob Burg is back with us.
Bob Burg making a repeat appearance. We're going to talk about his book, The Go-Giver Influencer. It's an absolutely amazing book. I highly recommend that you pick that book up. It's a great read. It will not take you long. If you've read the Go-Giver series, you already understand it's written as a business parable, but it is so rich in great details. And it talks about this idea of influence. And you know, Murph, one of the things that we think about with influence is that we can get into trouble with that conversation right from the very beginning, because what is influence to one person might be manipulation to another.
Yeah, where does that go, really, right? That there's a whole spectrum of behaviors that can be there. We've talked about that before because of Robert Cialdini, right? That's what Kahneman uses, that idea of influence to do what they want you to do.
Right. And it's really a matter of agenda, right? It's like, am I interested in your best outcome, or am I only interested in my best outcome? And Murph, you're not, every day in the sales world other than your connection here at Shore Consulting, but I'm sure you have been in that situation where you could tell this salesperson is interested more in their outcome than in my outcome.
Absolutely. Got taken for a ride by someone who sold me property up in Cripple Creek, Colorado.
And it's going to happen. I mean, they are out there. There are people that they've got to what we call commission breath that just want to meet their quota and accomplish their own goals. And of course, that's not the way that we look at things here at Shore Consulting. We look at salespeople as those who are fantastic at serving the customer's needs and helping them by making it easy to do what they want to do anyway. And as it relates to influence, as it relates to persuasion, we want to make sure that we're standing on the right side of that line, that this is ethical, that this is an act of service to our customer. We never want to be seen in any other way. But as we get into the conversation here in just a moment with Bob Burg, I want to challenge you as a salesperson just to ask yourself the question, what is influence to me? What is persuasion to me? What does that look like to me? Does it have any kind of negative connotation? Are you worried about that very word when it gets uttered just a little bit? Are you concerned as to whether you are seeing this the right way? I want you to go into this interview with Bob Burg, just thinking about it from that perspective. What do I think influence is? And the good news is that Bob Burg is going to help us reset that today. I think you're going to love this interview with Bob Burg. Well, we are thrilled to have back on The Buyer's Mind one of the real great thinkers out there in the world today, and not to mention a really, really good guy, and thrilled to call him a good friend of mine, Bob Burg. If you've never read The Go-Giver or any of the Go-Giver series, boy, you've got some catching up to do. It's an absolutely profound a body of literature. The Go-Giver itself has sold over 800,000 copies, and Bob's other books have sold well into the millions here. And now he has the Go-Giver Influencer. One last thing about Bob before we bring him on. like to think that we think alike in the sense that Bob and I both have that common passion for sales as a service to our customers. It's not an adversarial relationship in any way. It is helping people to do what they want to do anyway. And I think Bob and I share a common distaste for sales as manipulation, trickery, or warfare of any kind. Bob Burg, did I get that right? I know I'm speaking for you, but...
Well, no, you speak for me wonderfully. I appreciate that, and I appreciate you. As you know, Jeff, and I've told many people, you're one of my heroes. So for you to speak of me like that's a heck of a compliment.
That's very kind. Thank you very much. Before we get into the Go Giver Influencer, and I definitely want to talk about this today because it's such a great read, and you've set your own bar very high, but you managed to jump over it again here. Let's talk about just the concept and the idea of the business fable. You were in that niche and you've done it very, very well. And what got you started in that way? And how did you know, yes, this is what I want to do?
Well, in terms of the parables and fables, I owe that success to John David Mann. He's really is, the lead writer and storyteller. I'm a how-to guy, you know me, right? I'm step 1, step 2, step 3. Yeah. And John's a fantastic writer, though. So my first couple of books were how-to books. Endless Referrals, Network Your Everyday Contacts into Sales was my first one. I've had Winning Without Intimidation, Adversaries into Allies, some of those. Yeah. But working with John on the Go Giver, it's been an entirely different experience just through getting to work with him.
Yeah. Is it more enjoyable to produce the parable? Or I would think it would be because you and I have collectively, we've written our share of books, and boy, pounding out a book it's a labor of love, but the word is labor. It's hard work.
It is. Oh, it's very hard work. Yeah, and, my how-to books are just, I can't say back-breaking because that would be very figurative, mind-breaking. I'm not sure, but very difficult. I don't like there's some people who do love writing. John loves writing. I would rather be doing pretty much anything but writing. I don't like writing books, Jeff. I like having written books. And so that's a lot of work. So, with John, when co-authoring a business parable with him, where again, he's the lead writer, that's a pleasure.
But you like thinking about books. You like that planning and that creative process because you really are one of the more profound thinkers and that I've met, and I've seen you in the middle of a conversation over a lunch table look up and to the left while you're processing, and I can almost see the smoke coming out of your ears as you're constantly churning through. Okay, what's a different way to think about this? You're a nonconformist at heart.
I am definitely a nonconformist. In high school, I didn't go to the prom because everybody went to the prom. I'm going to go with that. That's why I didn't go with the prom. It had nothing to do with nobody being willing to go to the prom with me. I forgot that part. Yeah. But all the girls kept saying no, and then I decided I'm not going because everybody goes to the prom.
That's right. Sure. But it's interesting how we have that kind of conforming mentality, and it's comfortable and it's safe to be a conformist. But I remember hearing from Seth Godin on this, where when he went to college, he was like, "Okay, my goal in college is to get the minimum grades that I need to get in order to get a diploma, because I am going to soak up every aspect of the experience. I'm going to be in as many clubs as I can be. I can talk to as many people as possible. I am going to use this as an opportunity to get the most well-rounded education, even though at the end of the day, I'm not going to be on the honor roll." It's a nonconformist way to look at things, but I would suggest that approach served the man fairly well.
Yeah, I would say it did. He is such an amazing, amazing thinker. I really do believe in terms of, when we talk about nonconformity, I think it's really that I'm always asking why, and I'm always checking premises. So when I hear someone say something, or I even hear myself say something, I try to stay very conscious of what was said and ask, well, why? Why is that true? Who did this person learn that from? And who did that person learn that from? And why are they agreeing that that's the correct conclusion? And so I think it's very easy to kind of decide we're going to believe a certain way and then just allow everything that comes into our mind to affirm that. That's, of course, confirmation bias, right? When everything we hear, if it agrees with our already held biases or beliefs, then we accept it. Otherwise, we reject it. The problem with that is you can never learn anything. You can't grow.
Right.
And so, as much as possible, I do like to try to question premises, not in a disagreeable way, but in a way that hopefully keeps me thinking.
But it's very interesting, though, for you and I, coming at it from a sales background, even where we see, over the years, we've heard a lot of really wacky theories about what sales is, and even to the point of, somebody standing up there and saying, it's not really an objection until the customer brings it up 3 times, and they say it with so much authority and so much, so much. They're just so vociferous in the way that they say it. They say, well, it must be true. Look at how passionate the guy is, and I think you and I are probably more likely to stand there and say, yeah, you got a chapter and verse to back that one up.
Yeah, exactly.
So, I'm healthy with that. I'm good with that, and I'm sure, like you as well. I have no problem with the skeptic in a session that I'm putting on, that I'm speaking at. I have no problem with the person who's challenging it, as long as they're respectful in doing so for a desire to really understand. I really have no problem with that person who's just saying, let's talk that through. Why is that the case? It's a beautiful thing.
Yeah, exactly. I'm very happy with someone being skeptical. It's when they're cynical that it's sometimes not productive, because then they're really not looking for truth in any way. They're looking just to be cynical. But skeptical, that's great.
Sure.
You want your ideas challenged, because if they hold up, great. If not, then you've learned something.
Right. Sure. Well, that leads us right into the discussion on the book, The Go-Giver Influencer, because even as we look at influence, there are so many different ways. The very word is fraught with peril if we're not careful here, because even going way back to when Robert Cialdini first wrote The Psychology of Persuasion, he basically said in that book, hey, listen, I'm teaching you how people influence. I'm not making a moral stand here. This book can be used for good or for evil. You decide. But I have to believe that some of this thought process was going on in your brain. You and I have not had this conversation, but I have to believe that some of the thought process was going on in your brain about the idea of, boy, when we think about influence, I could be influencing somebody just to do that which is in my best interest, without really thinking about how this affects them.
Well, that's the difference between manipulation and persuasion. And, they both fall under influence, because when you think about it, influence on a very basic level is simply the ability to move a person or persons to a desired action, usually within the context of a specific goal. Now, I think it goes deeper than that. I think the substance of influence is different than that. But when we talk about the very basic definition of influence, by its nature, that's what it is. It's sort of like the physical law of gravity. Gravity in and of itself isn't good or bad. It just is. It manifests itself as good when it keeps us from floating aimlessly up into space. It manifests itself as bad when we fall off a 7-story building. Okay, so it's the same with influence. There's manipulation and persuasion. A manipulator and a persuader, Jeff, both understand human nature. They understand human interaction. They understand what drives people, but it's how they use it that's the key. I think the best explanation I ever read was from a book published in 1987 by Dr. Paul W. Sweats, called The Art of Talking So That People Will Listen, though it was much more about listening than it was about talking. And the way he explained it, manipulation aims at control, not cooperation. It does not consider the good of the other party. It results in a win-lose situation. In direct contrast to the manipulator, the persuader always seeks to enhance both the self-esteem and the position of the other party. People act as responsible, self-directing individuals because they're treated as responsible, self-directing individuals. I think it comes down to this, Jeff. Intent has a lot to do with it. And while a manipulator may not necessarily want to cause someone harm, if that's what it takes for them to get their way, they'll do it. They are all about themselves. They are totally I focused. With a persuader, that could never happen, because for a persuader to feel good about the situation, they've got to know that the other person came away better off and also feels good about it.
So you just really drew a line in the sand there, Bob, because this is that ongoing issue that you and I have spoken of before, that there are really two ways to look at sales. And one of those ways is whatever it takes, I win, you lose. And at the end of the day, I'm driving a nicer car than you are, neener. And then there's the side of it that says, no, there's no reason why we can't have a mutual purpose to what we're trying to accomplish here, and how I can't be your advocate along those lines. I know which side of the line you stand on, but I think you and I will be forever fighting that battle.
Yeah, I mean, I think we will, both in terms of public perception, because let's face it, the public has a in a sense misperception about selling, and it's pretty much caused by salespeople, who've done it in a way that doesn't lend itself toward the good feeling that sales should have, because sales is what helps people. It's what moves an economy. It's what makes things happen. Now, some people think of sales as trying to convince someone to buy something that they don't want or need. And of course, you and I would say that's the opposite of sales.
Right.
That's being a con artist. Selling, by definition, is simply discovering what the other person wants, needs, desires, and helping them to get it. That's selling. And for the prospect and the salesperson to both come away better off than they were before is the ultimate of what we're looking to do. But it always begins with the focus being on the prospective customer. The salesperson has to understand, and you and I have talked about this before, that no one's going to buy from you because you have a quota to meet. They're only going to buy from you because they believe they'll be better off by doing so than by not doing so. So you've got to have that focus on pleasing them, on determining what it is they need and helping them to get it, which is why we say that money is simply an echo of value.
Yeah. This is, Jeb Blount likes to say, people buy for their reasons, not yours. And
right.
That shouldn't be earth-shattering, and yet in practice, it probably is.
I know.
In the Go-Giver Influencer, we have these two characters, Jillian and Jackson, who have each of their separate dilemmas. And one of the things that I really loved about the book was that, I was trying to decide early on, who's the protagonist and who's the antagonist, right? How you always think that's the way that the book, you've got the hero and the villain. And as the book went on, I was like, okay, well, right now I definitely associate more with Jackson. And then a chapter later, I'm like, no, I'm totally in Jillian's shoes right here. It was really interesting to see how that unfolded to where you could really see yourself in the shoes of each of the two main characters. Was that intentional?
Well, yes. And that's one of the things we really wanted to get across in the story, Jeff, that we need to be able to see things from the other's point of view, which doesn't mean we have to agree with them or agree with their point of view, but we need to be able to understand them. One of the quote unquote secrets, because they're really not secrets, but we always talk to 5 laws or 5 rules or 5 secrets, whatever. Yeah. The second secret is to step into the other person's shoes, which sounds very trite, right? I mean, it's an old saying, but then you think about it, that's not so easy to step into another person's shoes because most of us have different size feet. In other words, we see the world differently. We come from different foundations, different belief systems, different paradigms. And so we don't necessarily know what this person's thinking or why. And that's why asking questions and listening is so important, because that's the only way we can even discover. Harry Brown, who was a real hero of mine, who wrote a great book on sales, he said people often would ask him, how do I motivate a person to buy? And he always said, you don't have to motivate them to buy. They're already motivated to buy. Your job is to simply discover what they're motivated by and help them get it. But we can only do that through asking questions. And then, as one of the mentors told the protege, because there's 2 mentors and 2 proteges, said, listen not just with your ears. That's the surface type of listening that so many of us in sales do. We're listening so that we can figure out what to say next. It's going to get the sale to happen, right? Instead, no, he says, listen with your eyes, listen with your posture, listen, he said, with the back of your neck. In other words, with your entire being. And when you do that, 2 things happen. One, you actually do learn more about what they're thinking, how they're thinking, why they're thinking this. And you talk about that so much in your last wonderful book about objections, that you've got to know why they're. And then what it also does is it causes this person to feel listened to feel heard, to feel understood. And that's so important.
You know, it's when I was reading that, and I remember coming across that phrase, listen with the back of your neck, and the idea of being all in. And it even dawned on me that when I am my best self, that's exactly what I'm doing. And I can picture myself in settings where I am all in on a conversation. I'm listening between the lines. I'm listening to see what they're thinking behind their eyes. And it's a wonderful experience, because it's the most enriching way to be able to learn and to be inspired. And then I very easily find myself in the trap of, while somebody is talking, I'm thinking to myself, you know, when you shut up, I've got something profound to say. Boy, this is going to blow you away. And there goes the listening, because now it's the me show. My sense is that's a pretty common issue, even in sales, right? We get out of a training class, we're all excited to share what we just learned, and there goes the listening, and thence goes the understanding.
Well, it's very human. You know, it's a very human thing. And that's why it's something that we've got to be conscious of and really train ourselves to remain conscious of. And it might be a matter of just kind of doing a check on yourself after every conversation, saying, on a scale of 1 to 10, how did I listen? How was my listening? And keeping that in mind. And you know, Jeff, we can retrain our brains. It takes a desire, it takes an understanding of why it's important, and then it takes a desire to actually take the steps, and then it's a matter of taking those steps and continually critiquing ourselves, taking pleasure when we succeed, not beating ourselves up when we fail, but saying, hey, you know, I can do better than that, and I will do better than that.
Yeah. I think that's, especially if you're in sales, there's that opportunity to listen even for the smallest details, and you never know where you're going to find that true gem that will really get you to understand that person and get you to understand their motivations. So we talk about stepping into the other person's shoes, but you also talked about another critical secret, and it came up early on in the book, the idea of mastering your emotions. And let's get into that just a little bit, about why mastering your emotions is so important if you want to be a good influencer.
Well, this is where it all begins, because it's only when we're able to control our own emotion, master our own emotions, that we're even in a position to be able to take a potentially negative situation or person and turn it into a win for everyone involved. Now, we all know this logically, and yet how often do we, based on what someone says or does, does it kind of hit our emotional hot buttons, and we cause ourselves to get frustrated or helpless feeling or annoyed or angry, right? And we say or do something that's very counterproductive. And we say, well, why does that happen if we're supposed to be professionals? Well, because, again, we're human beings. And as human beings, we are emotional creatures. We'd like to think we're logical, and to a certain extent, of course, we are, but we're pretty emotionally driven. We make major decisions based on emotion, and we back up those emotional decisions with logic. We rationalize, which, if you break up the word in two, it simply means we tell ourselves rational lies. And we do this to justify either the decision we made that we know we shouldn't have, or reacting in a way that was counterproductive, but we don't want to blame ourselves, right? So we rationalize it. Well, it's so important to master our emotions. But what we're not saying is that you should deny your emotions or forego your emotions. First of all, that in and of itself wouldn't be logical since we are emotional beings.
Right.
But it's also not necessary. Emotions are a wonderful part of life. They bring us joy. They make life worthwhile. No, we're just saying make sure you're the master of your emotions as opposed to they being the master of you. Or as one of my great friends, Dondi Scumaci, puts it, take your emotions along for the ride, but make sure you are driving the car.
Yeah, I love it. For one thing, that emotion doesn't really have a brain, right? The emotion is sort of disconnected to some extent from the logical brain. So I wouldn't want the emotion driving the car if the brain has a very difficult time making the logical decisions that you make while you are driving. So
very true.
Yeah. Set the frame. Give us that insight. You talked about mastering your emotions. You talked about stepping into another person's shoes. And then you talked about setting the frame. Give us the background on that.
This is so important, Jeff, because the frame is the foundation from which everything else evolves. My favorite frame setting story was when I was at a Dunkin' Donuts restaurant and I was reading, and there was a little boy about 2.5 years old, a little toddler who was running around the restaurant when his parents called him back over to the table. As he began to walk over, he actually started to run over, he slipped on the floor, he fell. Now, he didn't hurt himself, but you could tell he was shocked. And he immediately looked at the two people he trusts most in the world, his mom and dad, to get their interpretation of the event. What happened. He wanted to know, okay, what happens next? Now, I totally believe that had his parents gotten upset and panicky and run over, oh no, are you okay? He'd have started crying. But what they did is they handled it so beautifully. They were calm and they had smiles on their face and they began to applaud and they laughed. Oh, what a good trick. That looks like so much fun. And he immediately began to laugh. Now, what the parents did, Jeff, is they set a productive frame from which he could operate. We can do the same whenever we meet someone new. It can be as simple as a genuine smile, or the way we, the brief eye contact as we shake their hands. It could be a number of things, but here's the big one. What happens when someone else comes to the table, literally or figuratively, with an already negatively set frame? Then we have a choice. If we buy into their frame, the one they've set, now it's going to be a push against push kind of thing. It's going to be an argument. It's going to be right. Or we can reset their frame. Let's give an example. Let's say your prospective customer, his name is Dave, and who knows if he's had a bad experience with a salesperson or he doesn't trust himself to not, make a bad decision. I don't know. But for he shows up kind of defensive and lets he's just right now just looking to see whatever. Let's not buy into that. Instead, what if we reset it by saying something like, Dave, while we've been able to help a lot of people with this product, whether or not it's the right fit for you, we simply can't know without exploring deeper and determining whether it meets your needs. So please know our discussion is for both of us to discover that. And if it does, great. If not, that's okay too.
It's really interesting when we look at that especially the positive versus negative framing that you were talking about, because if I have a completely positive attitude and I come across somebody who brings me a negative attitude, well, first of all, mark my words, 10 minutes later, somebody changed. Either they're going to come up or I'm going to go down, right?
Right.
But if I can bring them up to my positive level, I win. But the irony about that is that the converse is not true. If they bring me down to their negative level, they don't win. Nobody wins, right?
Exactly.
Either we both go negative or this whole thing is going into the circular file in a hurry.
Now, see, that's a very Shorean way of teaching, meaning Jeff Shore, right? Exactly. I love it.
We're running low on time, but you talk about communicating with tact and empathy. Touch on that real quick.
Well, my dad always defined tact as the language of strength. And I've always loved that definition. it takes a mighty person to speak with tact and empathy, as opposed to just saying the first thing on their mind when they, right? Or buying into a negative frame and acting that way, or a person gives an objection and rather than thinking about it, they just come back with something without, or sending that email in response to someone who had something unkind to say. Tact allows us to communicate an idea to someone that they ordinarily may not have accepted, and do so in a way that not only are they not defensive toward us and resistant to our idea, but they're open to us and accepting of our idea. Mm-hmm. And so tact is really the difference maker. Empathy is a way of communicating to this person that you may not understand totally how they feel, but that you understand that they're feeling something, and you understand that this is distressing to them, and you are there to help them work through it.
And then finally, and this might be the toughest of all for many listeners out there right now, if the fifth secret of genuine influence, letting go of having to be right.
Exactly. Which, by the way, doesn't mean you don't desire to be right, or you don't want to be right, or that you don't care about being right. Mm-hmm. None of those are accurate. Of course you do. It means you're letting go of your attachment to having to be right. And when you do that, rather than making yourself less influential, you make yourself much more influential. Why? Because you're able to go into learning mode. You're able to look at something and say, is there more to it than what I think it is? That's that being willing to ask questions and to grow and to learn. And if that other person is not that way, then just by the very nature of you being that way, you provide yourself a step up because you're able to learn, you're able to grow, you're coming from strength. The other thing is this, Jeff, when this other person understands that they are working with someone who is not just looking to be right at all costs, especially at their expense, but who is seeking truth, this person is much less resistant to you, much more open to your ideas, much more likely to buy into your thoughts.
The book is The Go-Giver Influencer. You can find it on Amazon, on Kindle, Barnes & Noble, wherever books are sold. You can also listen to the Go-Giver podcast with Bob Burg. Subscribe to that on iTunes, Stitcher, wherever you listen to your podcast. But I want to just tell you, you want to read this book. And then I want to make a suggestion to you. You want to read it again. Because first of all, it's not that long a book. We're not talking about a book that's going to take you a couple of weeks to read here. You're going to be able to get through it and understand the principles first, but then as you go through and you reread it, it's going to speak to your heart and give you that internal change that you want to be looking out for. My guess is that if you're listening to this podcast, you heard so many things, even in the last half hour, that would cause you to say, yeah, I need to go deeper. You can go deeper by looking at that book and then following Bob Burg and just about anything that he puts out there. I guarantee you it'll be a very, very well-invested use of your time. As always, my friend, I'm inspired, I'm encouraged, I'm invigorated, and I want to go out there and change the world, which is always how I feel after I talk to you, Bob Burg. Thanks for being on the show.
And likewise, my great friend and brother, thank you.
Well, there you go, Murph. Always great to have Bob Burg on the show. As even if I was wrapping that up, that wasn't idle talk. Whenever I talk to Bob, I feel by the time that I'm done that, man, I'm so charged up. I'm so fired up. He is really an inspirational guy.
Well, I've got a full page of notes here that I'm just going to have to go back and study because there was so much that he just dropped on us.
Give me one thing that he dropped on you that you went, okay, that was pretty darn cool.
Well, the idea of money as an echo of value, mm-hmm. People buy when it meets their needs. Mm-hmm. That's how people buy. And when we think about that as a salesperson, it should change how we sell things.
Yeah, it's funny because, we don't typically pay a lot of attention to echoes if you put it in that perspective. But and yet money we think about all the time as it relates to the sales process and how much of a barrier we think that is. But it can mean so many different things to so many different people out there. He just has such a clever way of taking things that are otherwise very complex, but making them fairly simple to ascertain, don't you think?
Absolutely. Mastering your own emotions was another piece that he dropped on us, and just hugely important. Just even as a parent, thinking with my kids, it's got to be in control of your emotions when you're talking.
Yeah. I'll tell you, there was one thing that really jumped out at me, and I don't think this was in the book, but he dropped it in the interview, and it really caused me to stop and just write it down to chew on it just a little bit. But he was talking about standing in another person's shoes, and this is what he said. He said, that's difficult because we have different sized feet. And I think that was just a really, really interesting take, and a take that I have not really considered up to this point. The concept that it is difficult to stand in somebody else's shoes because we have different sized feet. And I think what happens here is that even in the sales environment where we want to be good influencers, of course, we want to influence people to do that which is in their best interest, to do what is going to best solve their problem. But when I look at it, I want to step into their shoes, and I have different sized feet. So how do I do this? And I think the way to do this is to really slow down long enough to get my agenda out of the way. Right? It's got to be to say, if the more of my own agenda and my own perceptions and my own background and my priorities and my hierarchy of values that I bring into the conversation, the more difficult it becomes to really understand what that customer is bringing into the conversation. My feet get in the way. And I'm just going to challenge you on this as a sales professional. When your customer is talking, do you understand? Or do you just think that you understand? Because that true sense of understanding, it requires some time, it requires curiosity, but mostly it requires getting out of yourself. That means stepping out of your shoes in order to stand where they stand. So I want to make one suggestion here for you, just on a tactical level, one technique that might help you. And I want to recommend that you practice this, not first in your sales presentation, but just in your everyday conversation. And it's a technique called the half-second pause. And the idea is this: when someone is talking to you and you're having a little conversation and they're sharing their opinions or their desires or whatever it is, before you respond, just pause for half a second. It doesn't take very long. It would really be, instead of just jumping right in, it's waiting just long enough to let it sink in. There, that's all it took. That's all it took, was letting those last words really sink into my brain. Now, the brain works really, really quickly, but it still needs that time. And if I'm intentional about the half-second pause, then I am also intentional about deeply hearing what my customer is trying to say. And I want to encourage you as salespeople right now, this is an ongoing problem. This is an ongoing issue in the world of sales. We get so stuck on our agenda, on what we want to say, that we short-circuit what our customer wants to say. And I want to encourage you right now, think about that half-second pause. Think about the opportunity to slow down. Think about truly understanding your customer, because when you understand them the most, that's when you get to change their world. We'll see you next time.